Hello and welcome back to the KCC channel. I'm Rob and I hope you are having a wonderful day today. Today I have 3 stories for you from the Malicious Compliance subreddit. Before we start, make sure to check out my website CanadianRob.com where you can pick up your own 3D printed Carmen Chameleon channel mascot. And yes, it comes complete with cookies. Check them out on my website CanadianRob.com. Alright, on to today's stories. Let's jump right in. This story comes to us from Hunter RDF, the only time I've ever heard of someone getting in trouble for doing more than required. Many years ago, I worked at a company that manufactured medical and scientific testing machines. Think shakers, small centrifuges, etc. I originally started there as a machinist until I hurt my knee at work, 8 years and 5 surgeries later, and it's still not fixed. After my injury, I switched over to the assembly side because that was more accommodating for my new limitations. Long story short, I was very good at my job, coming up with new ways to streamline several processes, new ways to assemble various things quicker than before, generally doing more work than my job description called for, and even having the temerity to prove the engineers wrong on multiple occasions. With everything I could do, I knew it would require the company to hire at least 3 people to replace me should I leave. It was announced one day that the assembly manager was leaving that job, whether for another position within the company or the company altogether, I don't recall. And anyone who was interested could apply for it with a promise that inside personnel would have the inside track over outside applicants. I put together my resume and went for it. The son-in-law of the company's owner was doing the interviews, which I aced. He went so far as to tell me that my resume was by far the most professional and complete he'd ever seen. But I didn't get the job. No hard feelings, I just went back to doing what I had been doing. Well, as it turned out, they hired a friend of the owner's son-in-law as the new AM. So much for that inside track, huh? It seemed to me, as well as my coworkers, that we weren't even at the same race course, but whatever. I could deal with it. I don't know what that guy's previous work experience was, but it became abundantly clear very early on that he was out of his depth. He had no clue why and how things were done the way they were, but he decided a couple of weeks after his hiring that he was going to change everything about the assembly area. One of the things he decided was that we were no longer allowed to exceed the number of machines assembled per day, nor were we permitted to skip over machines to get to others, regardless of the issue. Engineering issues, bad parts, wrong parts from the warehouse, etc. Some of those parts came from the machine shop side, but many from outside companies too. But we also weren't allowed to stand around waiting for new parts from the warehouse. We couldn't even get with the warehouse personnel to help find the parts we needed or help them get the parts into our assembly area. No more doing more became our mantra. Productivity and quality plummeted. Needless to say, none of the assembly team was happy in the slightest. I tried. I really did. But I have issues with not doing things to the best of my ability. I also have issues with not being able to fill my workday with work. You know, what I'm being paid for. I would be the absolute worst person to ask about quiet quitting. A few months into the new AM's tenure, my station was at a standstill due to an engineering problem with a new variant of a machine that I could practically build blindfolded. I had 4 to 5 college-educated engineers crowding my station, attempting to figure out a problem that arose only after the machine was fully assembled, which I explained exactly how it could be fixed with minimal effort, by the way, and I was correct, but that's a different story. While waiting for the engineers to come to the same conclusion as me, they did eventually, I went to the warehouseman responsible for pulling the parts I needed to assemble and asked him to switch over to a different machine I was going to build. The AM happened to wander over just then and asked what I was doing. I explained the situation with the engineers and that I was currently unable to work on those machines, and rather than standing there looking lazy, I was trying to get a jump start on the other machines I needed to build that day. At no point did I get sarcastic, which is my normal mode of communication, or mean, nor was I flippant in any way whatsoever. I was merely trying to get some work done that we both knew needed to get done. He starts loudly berating me in front of the entire shop, both the assembly area and the machine shop, specifically saying, "You're not allowed to do more than what I tell you to do in the order I tell you to do it." I placated him as best as I could, and I went back to my work area, which was still overrun with engineers, and settled down for a long wait. Cue the malicious compliance because I didn't work on another machine for the rest of the day. Not because I didn't want to, but because I was told I wasn't allowed. A couple of hours later, I was called into the AM's office for a meeting. I was expecting another stern talking to, which I could handle. Being ex-military, I'd long grown accustomed to being chewed out by people who didn't know how to do the job I was doing. What I was not accustomed to was getting a write-up for trying to do my job, especially since the official reason was insubordination. The AM didn't even have the courage to do it himself. He foisted it off on my immediate supervisor, who wasn't involved in the prior situation and had no idea what had happened earlier. I think he was busy putting out a different fire. When he asked what happened that justified my first and only write-up in the 2.5 years I'd worked for the company, when I explained it to my supervisor, all he could do was shake his head in disbelief. He was a good supervisor, at least when it came to getting the best out of most people, but he also wasn't really known for rocking the boat to stick up for his people. That said, when he tried to get me to sign it, I refused because I obviously disagreed. He said he understood, but he'd have to talk to AM about it. That did not go well. I could hear the yelling half a building away, despite the machinery running. Once again, I was called to AM's office, but this time I was facing the AM. He immediately started yelling at me again, but not just about the earlier incident. Now, he wanted to know why I hadn't built the day's allotment of machines. I coolly reminded him that not only was there an engineering problem with the machines I was supposed to build, he told me not to work on any other machines, and to do so was insubordination, as he so callously put it in the write-up. Then, he asked me if I was going to sign the write-up. Once again, I refused. I don't think it's right or fair to be reprimanded for doing my job. "If you don't like it," he said through clenched teeth, "find another job. I can find 1,000 people who can do that job." I never said otherwise, jackbutt. I was fed up now and refused to tamp down my anger any longer. But you'll need at least 3 people to do everything I can do as easily and as well as I can. Good luck with that. I left him standing there completely flustered, went to my work area to gather my personal effects, walked over to my supervisor. I informed him that I was going home and would like to use my accrued PTO and vacation time for the next 2 weeks. He told me it was no problem, and as he was approving my request, I let him know that I was also giving my 2 weeks notice and wouldn't be back. He shook my hand and wished me well in my future endeavors. I did the same and left. I got to leave on my terms, and through my son, who also worked there, as well as various friends I'd made while working there, I did learn that the company had to hire no less than 5 people to replace me and my expertise. I also got the last laugh because I'm pretty sure the AM got fired a couple of years later for various reasons, not least of which was the lagging productivity and his driving a mass exodus of the best personnel in the assembly area. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, we have one from a user called Effective Several. It says, "Good for you, hope you found a better job." OP responded to this comment and said, "Unfortunately, I didn't, although it was better paying. My knee, however, prevented my sticking around too long. I'm presently in the long, slow process of getting SSDI, which is taking forever." OP, I wish you luck in getting that approved really quickly. Now, have you noticed that when you leave a job and they try to get back in touch with you afterwards, it's like they really don't appreciate you until you're gone, and then they can see exactly what it was you were doing. What that means is that you weren't being managed properly, and the manager had no idea what you were actually doing. That happens in a lot of companies, unfortunately. OP, glad you were able to move on. Hope you get approved soon, and thanks for the story. This story comes to us from According Air 5665. Relocate our office space? See how that works out for you. This one is a small victory, but was super satisfying for me, so I wanted to share. I work for a large international accounting firm with offices all over the country. Our boss, Karen, was well liked until she became the boss. A smiling assassin type who only cared about her position and looking good in front of the higher-ups. All about the numbers, even if what we had to do to get those numbers didn't make sense. So here's the story. My team, about 12, were primarily based in the London office, but once a week, per my contract and everyone else's, we were required to work in a remote office ages from London. This place was miserable, a building in the middle of nowhere, one tiny corner shop for snacks, next to a motorway. The closest place to eat was a 15-minute drive away. We all hated it, but hey ho, it was only once a week. Anyway, when our boss got promoted, her sole life mission was to cut costs. Everything from stopping overtime to telling us we had no stationary budget for pens and had to take from other team stores, to allowing only one meal on social drinks and making comments at the meal when someone chose theirs to be the more expensive option. Are you really choosing that? It's expensive. I'm not sure we're going to have enough budget. This is considering all other teams went for large fancy dinners all the time, unlimited drinks, etc. At one point, she decided that the miserable location should be our primary office, and she wanted us all to go there 4 days a week instead of 1. All but one of our team were living in London. This meant for me a 2.5-hour journey one way instead of 1 hour. After a few months, this really took its toll. The assistant manager, a friend of mine, told me she said in passing to him that this office was less of a cost on our team budget than the London office. What a shock. I decided to speak to HR and see what my options are, maybe get an exception. Well, turns out that we had a policy that anything over your normal travel hours to the closest office location to your home could be used as your working hours, aka the extra 1.5 hours each way would be considered working hours. So I could arrive at 10:30 instead of 9 a.m. and leave at 4 instead of 5:30. Also, if trains and things were delayed or canceled, that would also be included in working hours. This happened often, as this place was in the middle of nowhere, infrequent trains. So I was often arriving at 11:30. I forwarded the emails with HR to her and explained how I would be complying with this policy. She agreed, but tried in a meeting to tell me that this was an exception for me and to not tell anyone else. Well, I told everyone else. And we all begun complying with the policy. This meant we spent less time in the office and productivity dwindled. She mentioned this a lot in meetings. I would often respectfully point out that it didn't make sense to force us to travel to this office and its effects. I was the main one speaking up about this. At some point, maybe a few months later, she told me I could go to 5 days in the London office, but again, this was a special arrangement for me, and that she appreciated me and was making accommodations only for me. She also said she would tell everyone I had special circumstances that allowed me this arrangement, and to keep our conversation confidential. I honestly think she just got fed up with me pointing out how our productivity is lower only because she made us travel there 4 days a week. Of course, I complied, but the team noticed I wasn't with them, and let's just say it caused a bit of a riot. I didn't say anything, but they figured it out themselves. No special circumstances here. Slowly but surely, one after the other, my colleagues started joining me in London, getting their own special arrangements with her. At some point, the majority were in London. Eventually, it was just her and the only other local colleague at this office while we were in London. We all had a good chuckle about when she would cave. It took a good few weeks. Then we got the email that our permanent location going forward would be London, 5 days a week. and the one local employee to that terrible office would work from home and come in once a month. It may have happened anyway, but I'd like to think that me speaking to HR and finding that policy at least had a hand in getting us moved back to London. As for Karen, I could go on and on about so many stories with her, but I did eventually leave for other reasons directly related to her. Unfortunately, she is still in the same position at that company. I do, however, enjoy seeing her checking my LinkedIn profile from time to time, and hopefully noticing that since I left, I have gone from a junior to the same position as her. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, there's one from a user called Barfridge0. It says, "So you got back pay for all those extra hours you did before you starting working your stipulated hours?" OP responded to this one and said, yes, they ended up paying us all out our overtime, as there was just so much, we couldn't use the time as extra time off instead. Okay, wait a minute, how does this work? How does this end up being cheaper for the company if they're still maintaining an office in London? Why not just send the people there instead of having them travel so far away? I think this manager just didn't want to admit that they were wrong, which happens way too often in the corporate world. This story comes to us from 6/1998. Take notes of everything you say in the meeting? Okay, but it will get you fired. So this happened a few years ago, and I will be vague since I'm still not sure if the dust has fully settled from this fiasco yet. At my former company, I was the secretary for a small improvement team that would meet monthly to discuss issues within the company and brainstorm ways to fix them. Something you need to know about me is that I was given this role because people know I am meticulous at keeping records due to HR-related issues I had at a previous place of employment. I don't think my boss realized that this careful record keeping applied to her as well, especially when she appointed me to be secretary of this little committee, but I digress. I was a model employee, award-winning, and went above and beyond what was asked, as were many others in my department, but we were still having customer complaints and dealt with regular safety issues due to the company at large, and through no fault of our own. When we brought these concerns to our boss's attention, emails were left unread, and during in-person exchanges, we were called whiny, needy, and were told that we needed to just deal with it. Whatever the issue, from items being stolen by customers to people being unhappy with the procedures the boss had set down for us to follow, it was always made to somehow be our fault. When we sought support from other departments, we were met with cold indifference, since the boss was great to them, and we must be exaggerating the things she said to us. Well, during an improvement meeting at the end of the fiscal year, it all came to a head. Myself and a couple of my team members dug our heels in and were insistent about the unresolved issues the boss refused to acknowledge, and she finally went off on us. She told us everyone was incompetent, didn't deserve our jobs, and that maybe customers would like us more if we were more likable. When people pressed her on safety issues, she continued to reiterate that we would just have to deal with it, and that if someone was going to die, they already would have, right? I, as the secretary, did my duty and took notes of all that happened over the course of that meeting. I usually did bullet points, but that night, I was feeling a little more thorough, so I wrote down words. Every word that was said, every hateful comment, denial of accountability, and idle threat was recorded in black and white. Now, a second part of my job was to distribute the notes from the improvement meeting to the rest of the company. So, come the next morning, I ran about 100 copies of the transcript of the meeting and hand-delivered them to every single department in the building. And things blew up. People from other departments who had attended the meeting were able to verify that everything I had typed up had really been said, and folks were mad, threatening to quit, refusing to do their normal duties, browsing Indeed during work, etc. My boss's boss, who worked at headquarters, so I didn't get the opportunity to hand her a copy, got wind of these meeting minutes only a few hours after I had handed them out and had an hour-long off-the-record conversation with me about all the safety issues I had documented, all the concerns I had submitted to management in writing, and all the records I had regarding my boss's inaction. She was very grateful for the 100 pages of documentation I sent over and thanked me for my time. The day after I unleashed Pandora's box, I put in my 2 weeks notice, took a new job, and pieced out to greener pastures. At first, it seemed like things were calming down after I left, but the following year, the company did not renew my boss's contract. I still feel a bit bad because I wasn't trying to get her fired or ruin her life. I was just desperate for some accountability thrown her way to create some positive change in the company. But at the end of the day, I just did what she had asked me to do. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, there's one from a user called Just Some Dude on the Net. It says, any boss shrugging off actual safety issues needs to be fired, preferably from a cannon. Another commenter down below called That Berg Fan said, magnificent work and do not feel bad about how it went down for your old boss. As my grandmother would say, she buttered her bread, now she has to lie in it. Alas, grandma wasn't very good at remembering sayings. OP, I honestly think you should be proud of what you did. I mean, this person was ignoring important safety concerns. That right there would be just cause to being fired. And let's not kid ourselves here, they were gonna be fired no matter what you did. It was only a matter of time. What you did just helped expedite the process.